Okay, I'm gonna do this one a little different. I think you'll like this. It's intended not just for, getting some insights to you. I kind of want to get a little sense of a pulse of things. So I'm glad we have some people who aren't in the ACE program because I know some of their ideas already. But I want to present the idea of coach as a guide because I think this isn't done a lot. A lot of people take this attitude. I'm not unique, but the frameworks anyway that put forth, or at least what I see on LinkedIn, and maybe it's mostly about Scrum, I don't know, seem to have coaches lay back and not always guide as much as I think they could. And so I wanted to kind of get a sense of where people are. So this is going to be interactive right from the beginning. I do have a few slides that some of you have seen before. In fact, some of you even helped me build. Uh, because I think that shifts things. So I want to have like a conversation about some things before those slides, then show you some of what I mean as a coach, and um, then have again some more discussion about it. I don't think there's a right way to be a coach. Some of it has to do with personality and the people you're with, but I think that there can be a lot more done than is. And I don't mean to be forceful in it. I mean to be effective. And that's a balance between things. So to start, I want to ask this question. What is a coach to you? Okay, so you can either share or put it in the chat. I'm going to open the chat. I prefer you to speak, but we're going to take 5 or so minutes. What do you think a coach is? And I'm talking now about coaches in the agile space, regardless of the approach, Scrum, Safe, Kanban, whatever. Or if you think it changes based on what approach you're in, then say that. So tell me what y'all think.
For me, I think a coach is someone who kind of guides you to bring out the best in you,
Okay.
and expands your knowledge base based on likely their experience, what they know, and has the ability to also guide you towards resources to expand your knowledge.
How would they go about doing that?
Having enough information to be able to point you in the right direction. They don't have to know everything. They just have to have the ability to point you in the and also to help you build your confidence as a person. Also help you remove the doubts that occur while you're trying to gain more knowledge.
And I see what Thomas said. Coach helps us improve by showing us what to do, what not to do, and understand why these improvements work. How would they go about doing there? Let's get a couple other people saying what a coach is from an intention point of view, but I'd also like to get into how they go about doing this.
I guess one of the things is by having the ability to be able to read you, understand you, and be able to figure out your weaknesses and your strengths, and then find ways to, I guess, bring the best, increase your strengths and diminish your weaknesses for you.
I
What
would I
would
would also add by asking a lot of questions and thereby probing our mental model of how the system is currently working or is supposed to be working or why are we having certain challenges and struggles. So not so much the leading by example and doing it for us, but asking us the questions so that we can reflect and understand and begin to understand, this is why it's not working so well.
well, yes, Susan.
And in order to do that, a coach has to observe what's actually going on,
Yeah,
as opposed to what people say is going on,
yes.
and be able to bring that knowledge to bear in suggesting.
I'd like to hear a little from Tony, Tim, or David because you're not active in the ACE program. I'd be
I will
interested.
I will put in 2 cents.
Thank you.
I never had direct experience with coaches, as in having the fortunate situation of having one. But there was a coach in the company that I worked for, and we had interactions, and he raised my hackles. I don't know if that's a right way to explain it. Every time we had a chat, I just became annoyed and absolutely suspicious. I thought there was something very artificial, not the good kind of artificial. Artificial is not bad by its nature, but just absolutely, I don't know if smarmy is the word. Anyway, really annoyed me. And I knew he was a coach, and I thought, wow, so this is what a coach is.
What was it he did that bothered you?
He tended to talk through you, not over you, but kind of talked through you. I knew he had a goal. And by the way, I do not, rationally, I do not fault him. He seemed to be effective. He seemed to have a good reputation. But personally, there was something that just rubbed me the wrong way. But apparently the teams that he coached and the people that he coached, they seemed to be very happy. They seemed to be very, seemed to succeed in what it was they were doing in the business.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't know if that helped.
that's another aspect of it, that you can, if you are a coach, you can react, people can react to you in a different way.
Mhm.
Let me ask a question, because I may just make this up. That's partly what I wanted to address a little today. Maybe, Al, you're making up this stuff. And some of it goes back to years ago when we did a lot of Scrum stuff and were more active in the Scrum community. People tend to forget that I was actually kind of a leader in the Scrum community, go back far enough, until I led beyond what they wanted me to lead. And then I became kind of an irritant. Uh, but there were certain people, and I see this in LinkedIn at some level as well. And I don't know it's just about Scrum, but I think it is in Scrum. I mention them because that's where I see it from most. But we know you can't tell people what to do, but there seems to be a like, almost more facilitator, more just see what they're doing and guide them and let them figure it out. Is that something you all notice? And is it in a particular method, or am I just kind of living out of the past, or making, sometimes you pick truths in quotes. When you read something, if you have a thought and you see one thing out of 20, oh, that's what I mean. It makes it more important than you meant. That's a kind of observation bias. So has anybody seen that the role of the coach shifts based on the process being used?
The last several Scrum trainings I've been in, and they were provided by the companies I was working for, the mindset was, we're going to present you this information. Here's all the basics. Here's your ceremonies, etc. Now you all need to figure it out, because that's what Scrum and Agile is. So just go off to your teams and start figuring out how to use this. And these were people that really had no Agile background. They were creatives working on websites. So they all kind of walked away scratching their heads. And to further complicate it, the coaches said, don't ask us questions about checklists or processes, because that's not going to work for you. So it was very frustrating to be a bystander. And then each team had a Scrum and an Agile coach, and they basically said the same thing. We'll help you figure out a story point, but you have to figure everything else out. And it really left people in a very tough situation. Again, they're not Agilists. Their work is being creative and doing great things like that. So it was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting there is you mentioned two thought processes, or two belief systems that are there. One is, what the person said. Agile says this is what you do. By the way, Agile doesn't say that, but I know people say that. And I think the second one is because most Agilists don't have a model of understanding, because if they came into the world through Scrum, Scrum doesn't present one. In fact, this has been a denial for years. This what I started talking to the Scrum community about in 2008, saying that if we took the lean mindset and principles and thought of Scrum as a partial implementation of that, because it's not a full implementation of lean by any means, you could take the lean understanding, what lean gives you, and with that, you could actually have be more directive in a sense, or at least know where to go. Any others? That's why. So those two, I think, go together though, and that's why I think sometimes they get it from Scrum. Now I don't know that that's what's intended, of course, but I do think some people think that, yeah, it's up to you to figure it out. Any other comments? This is helpful. Yeah, Susan.
Well, to take it to another field entirely for contrast, in the classical music, you have coaches who are good at mechanics. You know, if you want to do a trill better, you go to this coach. And there are coaches who are good at interpretation. So if you want to play this particular piece or sing this particular opera, that's the one you go to so you interpret it properly. And I think that a good coach might be able to do both of those, but there do seem to be those biases among coaches.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems understanding and questions are the theme that comes up, but also a sense of purpose. You know, so I like what Patrick said, the purpose as a guide, that fits me. I think a lot of the coach training, and I have not taken the training by, a lot of the really great trainers out there. I mean, I know a lot of the people who offer coaching workshops, and I think they're quite good, but I think what they're also doing is they're kind of generic coaching workshops, just how to listen better and how to how to speak better, but they don't get into some of the mechanics that actually we had a session. I'm going to put it on the website. It was the coaching track session from the ACE program, but where we talked about triggers and what I call transform. Triggers are like when somebody says something and it triggers somebody in the person you're speaking to. Tony, you had an experience of that. It sounds like it might just even be you were reminded of somebody. We're like that. It's really weird. People get imprinted on us some ways. Uh, and it's then there's also filters, like what you don't hear even, because, and then there's transformations where somebody says something, but you hear something else. So there are these issues. But I myself like this idea of the coach as a guide. And a guide, and the reason I like the word guide is because if you think about it, a guide, and it doesn't have to be like a structured guide, like, oh, I'm going on this tour and we have no options. It's like a guide who's continuously looking to see where we are and what we want and how we're capable of things. So we might go into a place, if I don't know if there's any place like this, but say you had 10 museums on one plaza and the guy says, okay, well, which one do you want to go into, and why, and have a good discussion about the available museums that you could go into instead of have a set course, because I don't think there is a set course. And Thomas, your comment about questions, or I think a couple people have asked said questions. I think questions are a lot more powerful than I think people give them credit for. And I know people give them a lot of credit. What I mean by this is questions can also guide you. I remember taking, and I've mentioned this in the ACE program a few times, but it was very powerful. I was in the, I don't know, 85, 86, something like that, taking a year-long seminar where we met, I don't know, a couple weekends a month, and he was teaching us Toyota and Deming. This is back in the 80s, before it was in vogue. This guy was just really brilliant. And there were all these things I was learning. And what was weird, I had this experience about 2/3 of the way through. I said, Al, almost every time before he gives the real punchline of what's important, I've figured it out. but I was clear I would not have figured it out had not all the other lessons taken place before. In other words, his questions, his presentations enabled me to be figuring out where he was going. He definitely had a direction, and he would eventually say where he was headed because it was kind of a workshop. So I learned that. I also learned something else, and I had a great experience at Boeing when I was contracting there. I was there to teach object orientation and Windows. I basically, the group I was working with was working with Fortran and mainframes, and I was teaching them how to get to smaller things with OO. And he was brought in for who knows why. I didn't view him as a competitor to me, even though he was doing what I was there. And I said, "Hey, can I sit in on this?" And I promised to be quiet because it was his show. You know what I mean? I didn't want to intrude, and I didn't. And he had these conversations with people. Oh, there were about a dozen of them, and they knew nothing about object orientation. They barely learned C++ at this point, if they'd had any C++ experience. And he just asked them questions, and he never told them anything. I mean, I was watching him kind of in awe because I would never have had this patience. This was like in 97. You know, I just was in awe of his patience. Uh, and what he would do is just ask them questions, and he would just take what they said and kind of feed it back to them to get another little bit inch forward. But at the end of the sessions, they all understood object orientation and one of the more complex concepts of it, which is how objects are responsible for themselves. That's really the biggest concept, and that involves all sorts of other things. So you can just talk to the outside of the object and not understand the inside of the object. And I can still remember this. Oh, I remember this woman's, she was my project manager actually. So she wasn't even a programmer really, but I can remember she was the one that the ice broke first. At some point, he asked some question in response, and then she said, "But then the object would have to be responsible for itself." And she paused because she heard her say that. And her jaw kind of opened. And then the person next to her, I'm not kidding, this was like in a cartoon. The person next to her's jaw opened, and then the person next to them, and these open jaws were coming at me because I was sitting at the end with all, and they all got it. And I was like, wow, that was unbelievably, I was stunned. So I asked myself, how did he do this? And this was where actually a lot of things came for me, this experience with this person. First of all, how did he have patience? The second was, how did he know it was going to go in this direction? See, that's what I was really wondering about. How did he know he'd get a result? How did he know he wouldn't get a different result? That's what scared me. You know what I mean? You go into a class, you want to teach something, and then something else looks better, and you're wrong as the trainer. That just didn't seem right to me. This was in my early days of coaching and consulting. And it occurred to me, what if he got a different result? What if they got to a different conclusion? What if they came to it logically and it was a better conclusion? Then he would have learned something. Is that so horrible? Well, maybe to his ego. But the other thing was this. I was very clear, having observed him for several hours, that he had confidence where it was going to go because he knew what object orientation was, and he knew it was a good thing. And if it turned out not to be a good thing, then he would learn something. So some of the major learning experience I had as being a coach was this confidence and respect that other people could figure it out, and he could guide them with his questions. In looking past, I didn't see it going forward, but after the fact, I can see that he was guiding them with questions. And that's actually nice right there to get that. That's how you guide. You don't guide by telling, you guide with questions. Okay. So let's go. I got a lot more here. This whole day thing is going to be mostly this. So imagine this scenario, because this is something that actually happened to me years ago in my own company. And it's like, it's an interesting thought. It brings up another issue. So we were teaching, this is net objectives when I say we in this case. This was, I don't know, 2002, 2003. We were working, had been brought in to teach Agile and Scrum at a major organization, but we were working with a small group. And they were doing Scrum, and one of my guys, who was actually a CST, if he wasn't a CST at the time, he was one pretty soon. He was very smart, highly respected guy, good friend of mine, also a technical guy and a good process guy. And he had gone in and trained them in Scrum, and they had Scrum boards and all that. And for whatever reason, because I didn't really used to check up, I checked up a little bit on my people just to see how they were, not micromanaging, but I went into the site and to see. And I think he couldn't go in a week. We were supposed to go in every other week. It was something like that. I had no indication anything was wrong, and I wasn't trying to check up. I was just there. So I go in and I meet the team. This is one team. Back in 2002, that was it. 2003, about that time, that was what you worked on. And these people were very unhappy. And I asked them, I did just ask them kind of questions, what they were unhappy with. And they said, well, we have this board. They're using a physical board on the wall. You know, I can't remember what it was like. In fact, I can't remember what it was like before or after. And they were unhappy with the board. And now what I felt is I wasn't going to tell them how to build a board because I didn't know what the board was going to be, but they were so frustrated. I didn't really want to spend hours and hours and hours with all of them. They were busy. They were under the gun to figure out what the board should be, letting them work through it. So I didn't want them to have to go through it. So I remember what I did. I had individual interviews, each person on the team, plus the manager, I think. I asked them, just took 15 minutes. What do you want this board to do? 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 You know, just everybody, 6 people, I think, talk to them about the board. See, I knew they didn't know what a good board was. And I knew it would take longer to get them to have a good board. So here I'm giving the kind of the opposite extreme of what we just talked about, but I'm curious what y'all think. And this was also in the early days of I was like 2002. I hadn't done a lot of coaching yet at this point. And what I did is I realized what they needed. I knew what they needed. And I probably could have gotten them to get to that point. But at this point, I was like, look, I know what they need. I put my consultant hat on. Why don't I just build them the board and then let them tell me if they liked it? Okay. So I brought them all in and I showed them the board. It wasn't that complicated. It wasn't the Kanban board. I didn't know Kanban at the time. It was just a typical Scrum board with how you indicate who's working on what and what you're doing, and managers could see what was happening. And they totally loved it. So this is maybe a different approach. So maybe there are 4. I told you I was going to learn in this, and I just did learn something because I'd been thinking there are 3 approaches, and now I just came up with a 4th one. So one approach is passive. They figure it out. The other approach is what y'all said, I think, which is guide with questions. Okay. Now, what I did is I formulated a solution on where they were, what they knew, and checked with them. I was not forcing this on them. And I did that to save them time because I felt saving the time was more important. They were getting very frustrated with Agile, and I was concerned they would abandon it. The 4th one is tell them what to do, which we know is not a good coaching tech. See, I didn't really tell them what to do. You know what I mean? I didn't say, well, this is how Scrum boards are. Never did that. Tell them what to do. Does that make sense? So here's my question. In fact, I said too much here. I'm sorry. I told you what I did, but what would you do in that situation? Did I make a mistake pushing toward this judgment of speed? So on one side you had speed, you had on the other side you'd have longer, but they'd figure it out and they'd learn more. Did they learn more my approach, or would they have learned more on their own? So that's a question, Jill. What do you think about what happened there? What would you have done?
I think it depends a lot on the situation in the team. Alan, your scenario, you said they're very busy, right? They're frustrated. I would agree with trying to help them along at that point to get them out of that frustration scenario and not in the back of their mind worrying about all the work they have to do. And then as follow-ups, when they become more familiar, start to talk to them about perhaps changes, or how do they feel about it? What have they learned? But how many times we find ourselves in that scenario where, people in the back of their mind are going, oh my gosh, I have so much work to do. Can we just get this? Can we just figure
Yeah,
this out
yeah,
now?
that was, Vicky, I like what you say, because you have these two extremes that I think are bad. One is totally passive and totally directive. So we don't want those. But that doesn't mean you're always in the middle or you're always guiding. It sounds like from what you said, and I think this makes sense. And I didn't, by the way, I want to just point out, this is what this explicit conversation we're having about techniques brings to mind the issues and makes it more understandable. One of my favorite comments is Edgar Schein's, we don't think and talk about what we see what we think and talk about. And when you just mentioned that, I now see there isn't a way to be a coach, except maybe in this realm of pure questions, letting them figuring it out and guiding them. And then this, I'll get a solution, but based on what they need and based on where they are, you need to change your style to fit the situation. I think I'm paraphrasing what you said. Is that right? Other thoughts, Susan? I know that's your hand up.
That another way of expressing what you did is you gave them a demonstration of what might happen. You didn't tell them that this is the one and only way to
Oh
make
yeah,
it
that's
work.
right.
You said, having listened to what you said, and you're concerned about this, and this, how would this work for you?
I like that
And
demonstration point, because what I actually did was I not only, I didn't pull that out, but I actually walked through a process that they could have done had they had more experience. And then you test it, say, does this make sense after we're through? So it was a double demonstration.
yeah, and if you've never seen something, sometimes the demonstration is very illuminating.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. This is really nice. I'm going to have to change the coaching book a little bit now because of this session. That's good. It's good.
Yeah. Yeah, Susan, that's great. The term demonstration, I really like that. Recently, I was listening to an American Airlines, one of their leadership team speak, and one of the questions he asked is, what do you bring with you when you enter a room? And it really made me think about coaching and coming in and helping people, and what kind of attitude do you bring, and what ability do you have to read the room and
Yeah.
respond?
Are there other factors besides their frustration, their level of knowledge? I guess the workload. The frustration was dual here. I'm going to point out. So there are three things. There's level of knowledge, which relates to the speed that they can solve the problem. There was a dual frustration, overloaded. I'm overloaded. And the other one was, I'm having to learn something new. Those are different. Are there other factors to attend to, whether you do guide by questions or whether you actually do this demonstration? What other things would you look at?
I think you kind of look to see where they are, and then based on where they are, you start to make the appropriate and adequate amount of content to guide them. You have to really know where they are to know how to push.
Yeah.
And what to put in front of them. Because if you don't do that, then there might be too much information, which will push some people back into a shell, or some people would resist you. So it almost becomes you assessing each individual to find out where they are exactly and how much of a push or guide they need.
Yeah. I like that, Patrick. It's clear there are also some different factors to this too. There's like where they are, like in knowledge, where they are in the organization, how much safety they have. And an interesting thing occurs to me. We talk about where they are like we're looking at where they are now. Okay. but actually it's also where they were, in the sense that if they have a history of people coming in and telling them what to do, they're going to be hearing you that way.
Right.
So that is where they are. Their
Which,
past is where they are.
right. That's, and you also kind of have to almost figure out their emotional state too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm going to post that thing we did on triggers, transformations, and filters, because I thought that was a great discussion we had last week to see how people react, where you can help figure it out. And again, that's also with questions. Okay, well, let's go on to any other thing to add? Yeah, please, Tony.
I just want to say what you and Patrick are talking about. The word engagement comes to mind. I know when you are speaking to an audience, you want to understand your audience sufficiently so that you can engage with them. And I don't know if that's really relevant in what you're talking
No,
about right
it's
now, but certainly
no,
it's not a bad thing if as
no,
a coach you
I
are
think
engaging.
I think you're dead on. That's the whole point. The
Thank you.
engagement. It's like you're I mean, engaging is a good word, because engaging is a back and forth. You know what I mean? It's not a telling, it's not a training. Uh you're engaged and they're engaged. Engaged is also an adjective, or I guess an adverb, like here's how I'm an adjective. Here's how I'm involved with you, I'm engaged with you. And then there's this engagement as well. So that's good. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Oh, these were just some things these were kind of the options. In fact, this is somewhat, and telling them the solution by itself isn't right. We've actually got these 4 things that I mentioned. This is actually giving me an interesting idea as I'm thinking back here, and might actually impact the ACE program. I know y'all like these more interactive, but I got to admit, it's like, well, how do I teach? How do I teach things to people in a certain amount of time? So there's an experimental way of teaching I tried years ago, and to be candid, I kind of didn't follow through as much as I could. I do a lot of my work based on this, but it could be interesting to do a combination. In fact, this is this notion called flipped classroom learning that's out for decades now. A few people do it. I almost never see it in the Agile space. I've seen it, some people do it at times. And when I first started training in success engineering, when I left the PMI, I actually set it up that way. And it didn't work well. And part of the reason it didn't work well, what it is first, sorry, and then I'll tell you what didn't work well. But I think there's a hybrid approach to it. Some professor at some university one day realized that what he does is he goes up there, he gives the same lecture he's given for years, and then he gives assignments, and then people try to figure out the assignment. And when he might be more useful for the students is while they're trying to figure out the assignments. So he decided to flip the classroom, so to speak, and give them a video or notes of his talks and say, read this, and then we're going to do your homework assignment in the classroom. That's why it's called the flipped classroom. And it wasn't that popular, or maybe he was at Harvard. Anyway, somebody at Harvard then picked it up and said, hey, this is brilliant. They started doing this, and it got to be popular. Back of the room instructions and games are a variant of this concept. The problem with flipped classroom, it's much more effective. But people then look at it, oh, you mean I got to read this and then I go to the class? Like in our professional world, it doesn't seem to work so well. But I'm starting to think that a hybrid model of it. I've tried both extremes. Those of you who know me know I'm an extreme kind of guy. And that's not a good thing necessarily. It's good as long as they don't get stuck in it. But I'm actually thinking this hybrid of conversation and some content to move you along. And actually, we're going to do that today. So I'm kind of I just realized I'm pre-doing that. I do have some content to present to sum some of this up. And maybe that's a technique for training in the future. I'm going to try this. We have a few people here in the ACE program where I think that I'm going to give that a shot. Have some of the discussions like I've had, and then here are the slides or the content, see what happens. So I'm trying to always improve the training part. Okay. Any other comments? where we are. This is where I wanted to have gotten to, was right here with this discussion. So I'm kind of flipping it. But any other insight? So here, maybe let me actually add this slide. I want to add, oops, I'm going to add this slide right here. Yeah, they're supposed to be alphabetized. They were. I just skipped over it for some reason. So one way is let them figure it out on their own. Another way is ask questions to guide them, see what their problem is and where they are, so you can interact with them correctly, effectively, and present a solution, a potential as you know, I am the king of run-on sentences. And then the fourth one is tell them what to do based on where they are. Tell them what to do based on what you know. So are there 5? Are there more than 5? These seem to be, these are just dots in a space, but does this seem to capture the different approaches? And we don't like this one. And we don't like this one. It'd be interesting to show the costs of each of these. I'm not going to do that now. You know, this is expensive. They get more frustrated. It seems that what we've said, we can alternate between these two things based on the situation. Does this make sense? I mean, is this what we've been saying? Is there another one? I do like this idea of saying, what's the disadvantage of this, the disadvantage of this, disadvantage of this, and the advantages and disadvantages of these that help you choose which way to go. Okay, just going to let you reflect on this for a couple of minutes. This fit? Cool. Yeah, I like this. See, what I like about this is then I'm not saying how you have to be a coach, which is where I was coming from. Now, I wasn't really quite coming from it, but I love the distinction here. And I see that, yeah, I did this sometimes. And yeah, it was actually good that I did this. See, now here was an interesting conversation we had later. And I'll be candid about it. This was not a success at that one place. The overall organization we worked with was very successful. But in fact, that particular team seemed to stagnate. And then I remember an ongoing debate for years with this fellow who was in there. He claimed they stagnated because I went in there and I helped them instead of forcing them to figure it out. See, that's the attitude I sometimes get when, don't help them. It's better if they get at it. It's like my dad taught me how to swim. And I tell you, it was a lot easier once I got out of the bag.
Oh.
It's a horrible joke. I had a loving dad. But there are people who think you got to go through it, and then maybe they'll make the metaphor to the monarch butterfly, which if you help the monarch butterfly out of the chrysalis, he'll die. The struggle builds the muscle. But I don't think that's true here. Anyway, I said they were set on a bad path by being frustrated. So you got to get, there's an argument here on both sides. So I'm not saying absolutely, maybe that's just another factor. Maybe there are times to do this. Maybe there are times to stretch their muscle. Okay. Okay. Any last comments, or I'm going to go into something? Yeah, Susan, please.
I think part of the decision making as to which way you go is looking at the entire context of what they're being faced with. In Vicky's
Yeah.
example, they have all this other work, and when people feel overworked and stressed, they don't think as well. So if you want them to struggle and figure it out for themselves, you have to provide the time and space in which to do that, which means maybe you do something about their overloading first. But
Yeah.
if it's a situation where they have to make a decision and they have to do something right now and they're overloaded and they're not learning anything because they're tired and frightened and frustrated, then a demonstration might be in order.
Yeah. 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 That's great. That's great. See, now this is the problem. It's not that the world is so complex. It's that the way to deal with it is somewhat not a simple just do this. Because, see, I don't actually think this is that complicated. And I actually believe we know how to address this. You can tell when people are afraid. Well, actually, let me ask you that. No, I shouldn't say you can. Have you ever been in a situation where you could tell something was going on in the room, but you weren't sure what it was, but you knew it wasn't a good thing? What did you do? Oh, somebody's accidentally drawing things on the board. That's right. I'll fix this slide later. Oh, it's not on.
Accidentally to let you know the typo.
Oh. Oh. Tell them what to do based on what you know. Oh, the R. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so here's the other question. Here's another question. I reacted to that once. I had some hooligans, what can I say, that actually sabotaged the talk of mine. That's one of the things they did. But I appreciate your good intentions there. Okay, so this was so it's kind of like, have you been in this situation of knowing what's wrong? What can you do in these situations? You know there's something wrong. You don't know what it is, but you know something's different. It shouldn't be this way. What can you do?
I've been in the situation, and one of the things I did was, go around the room, have people give some more information about what they feel the goal is for the session, what are they thinking, but they were not people I knew particularly well. So I thought it was difficult because you could tell they were still really afraid to speak up. So during the next break, I was able to talk to a couple of people and get some insight. But that was an incredibly frustrating situation, particularly with people that you don't have a good background with, or a background.
Yeah, so when you don't have a relationship with them, it gets a little tougher.
Right.
What other things might you do?
You can find a way to let them express things anonymously.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of fear, that is sometimes very beneficial and sometimes extremely productive.
Others? I found this one. Like you say, Vicky, sometimes you can't. I can remember 3 cases in particular. I was in a room once, doing a training where I'd actually had a good relationship. So in all these, I'd had some time with them. And at a break, everything was going great. And at a break, everybody came back. Their heads were down, looked at the body language. The energy of the room was dead. And I asked them, I said, did I do something wrong? You know, what happened? And over the break, they had gotten this email that there were layoffs about to happen. Okay, that's not a good thing in a workshop. So I couldn't stop the workshop, but you have to acknowledge then what's going on. See, that's the other thing. Ask them what's going on, and then what you have to do is acknowledge it. I had another thing happen. I don't know if I've written this up. This is a great story. I think I did actually. I was brought in by a manager who'd been at another company, and he really liked my design patterns training and my Agile stuff. And he actually wanted me to do this whole bunch of stuff, and there was no way he only had a budget for 2 days, and there was no way I could do it in 2 days. But he said, now, Al, look, just spend 2 days with them. Let's get as much as we can. So I had 2 days with about 100 people. That was the other thing. There's no way I can make an impact on 100 people. Maybe it was 70, but it was more than 25, which was my sweet spot as max in those days. And we had 2 days, and they were supposed to learn how to do some design patterns and Agile and all that. And anyway, I had looked at the code. I'd spent some time looking at the code, so I knew what they were doing and I knew what things were. And the first day, I was just teaching them some basic design stuff. And I knew what their problem was. They were moving their application from the United States to Canada, which they speak English in most of Canada, but not all of Canada. And they have different laws, dates are different, taxes are different, you know, things like that. So the first day was great. It was like, oh, there's so much fun. These guys are so good. They're learning all this stuff. And the energy was high. You know what energy in the room is like? You can feel that energy. The energy was high when it left. The next morning, energy's dead. Nobody's talking. Fear. I could tell, I could sense there's fear in the room. Well, you can't walk over fear in the room. You know, you may be afraid to deal with it, but that's just walking over it too. So I asked somebody, I said, guys, you were so happy yesterday. You don't seem so happy today. And they said, well, yesterday we were just learning, but today we said we would apply it because that's what I told them. The first day we'd learn, then we'd apply it. And now the reality has struck us that we have a release in like 2 to 4 weeks. I forget what it was, but it wasn't long. And now you're telling us we have to use this stuff in that release and we don't know how. So that was good. The guy had that space, but I'd established that with the day. So I was trying to figure out what to do. I mean, this all in my mind just took me a minute or two. One of the things was I knew that what I was saying would directly apply because it was a simple pattern, template method pattern, turns out. There was a simple pattern that I knew they could use that would be faster. See, this is the other thing. When people are fear, though, this is a real principle I need to remember. You need to recognize when people are in fear, they think anything different is going to be worse. They were afraid what I was telling them was different and was therefore going to be worse, and they didn't have the time. I knew that what I was telling them was going to save a massive amount of time. So I told them this. I can still remember this. I said, oh, and this was interesting. The manager who brought me in was in the back of the room. He was a good guy, so I knew they weren't afraid of him. And I said, okay, well, here's what I'd like to do. Will you give me 2 hours? And I might have even said 1 hour. I can't remember, but it might have been 1 or 2 hours. Give me the 2 hours. And if at the end of 2 hours, I can't convince you, you don't believe that it'll be faster to use this stuff, then you don't have to, and I'll take it with your manager saying, I didn't get my job done. Sorry, they shouldn't use these techniques to finish the project. Boy, there was an audible release in the room. Oh, thank God. So that's how I took rid of the fear. If I had 2 hours, because then I needed the rest of the day to show them the specifics of this. Okay, so I couldn't say, give me all day. And I looked up at the manager and he said, is that okay with you? I forget his name. He said, yeah, because he trusted me. Well, after an hour, they were convinced they would go faster. Whereas I could have spent all day trying to get them in the fear. Because now they could listen and I could show them specifically what they do. That's what we did, actually. I'd given them the theory the first day. Now we actually walked through a particular case. Okay, let's take this module. How do we do this module in this way? And it was basically just a slight different organization of the same stuff they had to do, but now they could see how to do it more easily because it abstracted out things. Okay, I love this. Yeah. This, by the way, there is a board that we have in the ACE program that I'm going to make available to y'all. I don't know when I'm going to pull it up. It's called the Clean Slate, Vicky, because when you said this thing, there was all this stuff. Sometimes you just need to clear the air, and there are ways to do it anonymously as well. So here, let me do the canned stuff. Okay, except that's not the slide. I thought I just opposed these. Here it is. Oh, I put that new slide in the wrong place. I'll fix that. Okay. So this is Al Shalloway's approach to coaching and Paula Stewart's, because both of us are writing this book, and this is part of the ACE program. In fact, as part of the ACE level certification for teams, this is part of it. You have to have this attitude. Okay, but I'm open to saying this isn't the best attitude, but there are 5 things that I think an effective coach needs. And I'm going to present them to you and we'll talk about them. We only got 7 minutes, but just do each one. So one is, I think you need to be a visionary. It's like they have to know there's a better way. You have to be responsible. You have to believe we're all valuable. I relate to the people I'm coaching and I walk my talk. And I think we all mentioned these already. So I think this is a consistent recap of the essence of things. So let me go through each one of these. By visionary, you see a potentially better situation. See, if you don't see a better situation and you're just in there with them all trying to figure out, I don't think you can coach as well. You have to have confidence that we can understand and make progress. See, that's what people forget. To me, a coach needs to know more about the thing they're coaching in. They don't need to know the details of programming, but they need to know workflow if that's what you're doing, a coach has. Discovering what's needed, responding to surprises. It's not going to be easy. You've got to do all this. But you have this attitude, I can do it, we can do it. And we create a model of understanding together. I'll leave this last slide up. I love this comment. Idealism is one of the greatest forces in the world. It makes seeming impossibilities possible and exceeds where prudence fails. But unless the idealist is brave and has the courage to face the truth, his idealism creates nothing. There's a great quote, but see if I have time for it, I'll do it. Just see if I can find it. Okay. So you need to be a visionary. By the way, I came to this conclusion by talking to Tom Gilb, who in my mind is one of the top 2 people in the whole business improvement space, Don Reinertson being the other. I'm blessed to have them in my life. You have to take responsibility. Now, responsibility is not blame. People think about it this way, but it's not blame. It's where you come from. I'm coming from, I'm responsible. I'm going to make this happen. When what a coach has said isn't understood, they take responsibility for the miscommunication. Doesn't mean you messed up. It just means, okay, well, how else can I say this? Oh, they can't hear me because they're in fear. Oh, they can't hear me because I don't have an established relationship with them. What else can I do? Okay. I'm committed to achieving a better understanding. Okay. And instead of blaming people for the miscommunication, how can I do it differently? I'm just not going to give up. And yes, you can lead a horse to water and you can't make them drink. That's their job. Their job is the pace they go at. My job is to keep opening the door to see if they walk through. If it doesn't happen, you don't blame either side. You get that? We put blame and responsibility together, but they're different things. Being an idealist without the commitment, oh, well, that group was stupid. What could I do? Nobody could help them. You know, no matter what occurs, you keep up. That's your job as a coach. Humility and respect. It's an acknowledgement everyone has value. Now this actually I have confidence up there because there's this balance. You're confident in your own, but you give that does you're giving them credit doesn't take anything away from you. This goes to the other thought about people are competent in different domains. How about that? I forgot that slide. That was next. Okay. This is what humility does not mean I'm humble and I'm subservient and I don't know. It means I'm worthy and they're worthy. It's just we also know I don't know everything. By the way, that opens up lots of doors with people. When you think you know everything, they know you think you know everything. If you think you know everything and you don't tell them that, you're telling them that. People are smart. They can tell when you think you know everything. Okay? That unless you're totally an expert, and you actually you also even when you are an expert, you have to recognize other people are experts. So it's like we used to do this in Net Objectives all the time. When I was the CEO, I owned the place, but I never once said we're doing it this way because this is what I think. Not once in 20 years. Well, I didn't have employees for 19, but 19 years when I had employees, I never once did that. That was called the CEO card. I'm never going to play the CEO card, I told them. We're going to, when we can't figure out what to do, the person who has the most expertise will make the decision if we're blocked. Now, that was sometimes me. In fact, there were sometimes people asked me to make a decision. Usually I deferred for a little while. Sometimes I said, okay, I will. But it was only not because I was CEO, but because I knew more about marketing and some things like that. So I never played the CEO card. You've got to embrace the value of others. And empathy and compassion. It's being able to see where somebody else is. It improves. People like to be gotten. What is it? Where the first step is I'm worth something. We talk about the different psychological things, importance and acknowledgement. Understand their problems, recognize. A ways back, I had systems thinking as part of the attitude, and I took it out at the ACE that we had a session on it, and the realization was systems thinking was really a capability, an ability, and I realized, yeah, but it's so important because it helps you to recognize many challenges they are having, even their attitude is due to the situation they're in. Okay, just recognize that. You don't need to know systems thinking. You've had bad days or you've been in bad situations. It affects you, right? You don't need no system. Just know that. That's a big thing. And then finally, congruence, integrity, walk the talk. You lead by example. And it often takes courage. It's not easy to do this. Oops. Okay, so I put this as a summary. You have a path forward with confidence. I know I can do this. I'm responsible. I'll work with others to achieve it. I'll understand the difficulties others are having, and I'll lead by example. Is this congruent with what we were saying the early part of the hour? Is there anything missing? I'm sure there is, but is this the gist of it? Do you see this much in the Agile space? I actually,
I think one of the problems you see, especially with coaches in the agile space, is they're coaching more towards the framework rather than really coaching the whole.
right. Thank you for saying that. I think that's true. A unattachment. What's a better word? A detachment? No. Well, not attached. Not attached to a particular solution. Yeah, I do think that happens a lot.
Which means you need to see what the problem is before you even try to guide or suggest to a solution.
Yeah. Any others? Yeah, I like this. This is kind of obvious, but unfortunately, most people are selling an approach.
Yes. And
And-
maybe change problem to challenge.
Yes, thank you. I say that myself, and then there I go, fall into old
Yeah.
habits.
I didn't hear it till it was out of my mouth.
Yeah, yeah. This is one of the challenges we have because we're training people in particular approaches. I do have, and this will be something maybe I'll talk about this next session because this is a big issue for me. So I've been trying to say Amplio is not a framework, but in a sense it is. It's what I call an adaptive framework. It's because at any one time you need to know, what am I doing? What am I working for? What are my hands? What steering wheel are my hands on? So there's a mental model of how to guide, but at the same time, it has given you things to look at. So I call it it's an adaptive framework, and it creates at the moment frameworks, which are your agreements. I think that would be an interesting conversation. How can I get people to understand that? I'll have to see what I've got. Would that be an interesting topic? How do you talk about the fact that you have something that's adaptable to you, but provides specifics at the same time? That may be more of an advanced ACE conversation. I think I'll use an ACE working session for that. Anyway, this approach works for y'all. I like this session myself. I learned a lot, and he's all seem more engaged too, which is good. Okay, well, I'll see if I can keep doing it this way. I'll have to look at it. And thanks for the engagement. This was very cool.